Thank you, Linda. Now, you just said that the person that's doing the advertising in these cases are Airbnb, correct? They're the
No,
ones actually
Airbnb
advertising?
Airbnb is providing the platform for the advertising.
Right. Well, the renters are contracting with Airbnb, correct? To basically get their members to rent their apartments, correct?
Sorry, they're
Right.
not creating a contract.
Excuse me?
They are not creating a contract with Airbnb.
Well,
Are they?
I mean, you just can't go on to Airbnb and put your apartment up. You can't go on to Airbnb to rent an apartment. Don't you have to give them a credit card, Airbnb, in order to rent that apartment?
Not to advertise.
Well,
To engage in the transaction, you have to, but not to advertise.
all right, let's try this way. I have an apartment for rent, all right?
What? I can't.
I have an apartment for rent.
Okay.
Let's try it a different way.
Well, go ahead.
I'm going to rent out that apartment. I use a real estate broker, okay? Basically what I'm doing is I am contracting with the real estate company to rent out my apartment. You'd agree with that?
If that's what you're doing, yes. Then
Okay.
That's fine.
And in this case, Airbnb is acting almost like a real estate, because what's happening are the people have an apartment that they want to rent for under a month. They're reaching out to Airbnb, and Airbnb is advertising it on their site, right?
You know, I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a real estate agent who will help you rent out your unit illegally.
Well, no, I'm just using an analogy here. When I have to rent out an apartment, I'm just renting an apartment out, especially in the city of New York, right? I tell a real estate that I'm renting out an apartment. I engage their services. They usually charge me one month's rent. So the person that's renting gets charged 1 month's rent that goes to the real estate. That's how it works in New York City, right?
What's the question about the bill?
So the analogy is the same. So now these people are engaged in Airbnb for the same service as a real estate. Now the real estate is the one that advertises. Airbnb is the one that advertises. So would the fine be directed at Airbnb here?
No, actually, I mean, your example has problems, but the way this works is only the guest pays when they rent the room or the apartment. The host does not pay.
Well, who's actually doing the advertising? Who gets fined here? Because we went through...
The host gets fined.
The host?
Yes.
So that's Airbnb?
No, the host is the person offering for rent their unit.
Well, is that explicit in the bill? Because we asked this in codes, and it's unclear whether it was the person that owned the apartment or Airbnb who would be fined.
Well, let me explain it to you. It is the host. It is the person advertising. Airbnb is protected by the Communications Decency Act, and that gives them federal immunity for liability for service providers from content generated by third-party user of the service, which is the host.
Okay. So basically what I'm doing is I'm just contracting a service. They're not actually writing the ad. Airbnb is writing the ad, right?
No, that's not right.
Okay. Well, let's try another way here. Law enforcement, you said, is the one that is going to be regulating this.
It's actually the mayor in New York City. It's the Mayor's Office of Special Enforcement, which was created to combat these kinds of illegal rentals. Across the state, it would be, the appropriate agency that enforces multiple dwelling law.
Well, you said before law enforcement when you were debating my colleague.
You know what? I misspoke. It could wind up in law enforcement if there are other charges pressed, but what I should have said is in New York City, it's the Mayor's Office of Special Enforcement.
And do they issue a summons to the person?
Yes, they do.
Okay. And where's that summons returnable to?
It's an agency within the city.
And where's it returnable to outside the city?
That's up to the agency that enforces the multiple dwelling law. It's different in different portions of the state.
Okay. And this is like a 3-family home or a 4-family home or
No,
a
as
5-family
I
home?
said earlier, 1- and 2-family homes are expressly exempted from this law.
3 to 6?
3 to 6 would be included in the multiple dwelling law, and Class A is permanent housing. So what you're essentially doing here is renting out illegally units that are meant for permanent residents only, not for tourists.
Okay. And it's not just landlords. It's a person that's a renter.
It is the host. It could be the landlord. It's often commercial operators who take many units off the market. As I said earlier, when one of the 4 rentals that I made over Airbnb was a commercial operator who had hundreds of units at his disposal to offer for rent. These are units that were designed and built as apartments for permanent residents, not as hotel rooms.
Okay, so I have, say, a 3-family house. I'd fall under this. Now, in my 3-family house, I have all family members.
Right.
So if my family member, say the senior citizen or the grandparent in the home who's a snowbird
Your home.
and goes down to Florida and back up here, and if she was to use this service, which is a family-owned, family-occupied building, okay, and if Grandma puts her...
You know what? If it's let me explain this to you. If it's occupied by family, then it's not illegal.
Well, if I have a 3-family that used to be rent controlled, but now my whole family lives there.
Well, that doesn't really exist.
It doesn't. Okay. But if I have a snowbird, a senior citizen, who has a very low income, and she uses this service to be able to help subsidize her rent, subsidize her food, subsidize her medicine, and she decides to use this service, she would fall under this and be fined if she's in that apartment.
The example you provide that a poor senior citizen would most likely remain in her unit and just get somebody in there while she's present, and that's perfectly legal.
Well, okay. If she goes out and visits with family and she does this, she'd be fined. If she tried to generate income.
You know, you can ask this a million ways. The 2010 law is very clear. If you want to use Airbnb as a platform and rent out part of your apartment while you are present, be my guest. That's perfectly legal.
Okay. So let me get this. But a 2-family home in the same situation, that tenant under this legislation would be able to rent that or use Airbnb?
Can you just repeat that?
So if I have a 2-family home, same thing, I have a renter,
Yes.
right? And it's under rent control. If it's under rent control, or she does this.
A 2-family house is not a multiple dwelling. You can do that.
Yeah, a 2-family house is a multiple
No,
dwelling.
well,
It's 2 families.
Not under the law, maybe in the dictionary.
Okay. But a person in a 2-family house
Yes.
would be able to use Airbnb
Yes, absolutely.
without the consent of the owner?
As I said, 1- and 2-family houses are not covered under the 2010 law. So if you have a 2-family house, do with it what you will.
Okay, thank you, Linda. Thank you.